Do you remember that time in the 1980s when Disney tried to make a movie out of one of the sequels to The Wizard of Oz? Did your parents rent it for you when you were young and fascinated by all things whimsical? Did the movie start playing and you were just entranced by scenes like this? Return to Oz, the sequel to the 1939 classic, which was actually made by a completely different movie studio. And what happens when people have an idea in their head about a story series being all sunflowers and songs about lollipops? Then someone comes along and makes a movie about a much darker chapter in the saga. Well, it fails. Horribly. But what many people fail to notice about this movie is how it succeeds in telling a story that is tense, visually creative, and even a little scary at times. It has its fair share of shortcomings, and it sometimes has plot devices that are a little weird.
She has a chicken with her.
But I think movies like this represent something that we are losing touch with in our society. That children grow stronger from knowing fear and seeing that dark times come, but they will also pass. This movie is meant to frighten kids, but just enough to make its happy ending that much more rewarding. So let's take a little trip down the yellow brick road once again as we explore Return to Oz. You can decide for yourself whether it deserves all the grief it's been given over the years, or whether that's all just movie misperception. That's the name of the show, by the way. Right off the bat, we're given the impression that we are in a very different kind of movie than most of us would have expected, as the opening shot is pulled back in a very creepy fashion. It reminds me more of something out of
a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight.
The music is so somber and eerie. The entire feel of this shot is just very bleak. Especially when we see that Dorothy is played by Hollywood psycho Fairuza Balk.
You piece of shit, spray spreading.
Well, I'm sure she's not like that all the time. Well, she's very cute in this movie, I assure you. Auntie Em and Uncle Flibberda decide to talk about how batshit crazy they think Dorothy is at completely audible levels while they know she's awake in the next room. And they discuss the possibility of sending her to a mental hospital for her ramblings about the land of Oz. You know, these are the things of comic fodder nowadays. Discussing what would happen if somebody had an otherworldly and mystical journey, and then had to come back to the real world and tell people about what happened. Well, Frank L. Baum knew exactly what would happen. You get sent off to the nut bar factory for packaging. The next day, Dorothy finds a key on the ground that has the word Oz on it. So she tells Auntie Em about the key and shows her the proof of it saying Oz on the top, and Em responds accordingly. Come along, dear, there's a nice padded room in your future. So they go off to the mental hospital. And this is when the mood of the movie goes from being a little bit somber to feeling a little bit more like... The good doctor at the hospital introduces Dorothy to the cute and cuddly therapy machine.
Now this fella here has a face. Here are his eyes, and this must be his nose, and this must be his mouth.
Will it hurt?
What? No.
That's right. Electroshock therapy is sort of like...
Here we go.
And you're going to love it. So Aunt Em leaves Dorothy in the hands of the most friendly nurse in the world. She even designs her own dresses to make her torso resemble the demons she worships. Now I know it seems like I'm poking a lot of fun at a movie that I'm supposed to be building up, but that's really only a defense mechanism for the frightened child that's living inside my head, and who's continuing to threaten to cut off my duodenum if I don't stop watching this. They strap Dorothy down and begin to wheel her towards her fate.
Did I hear somebody scream earlier?
No.
Before they can zap her into oblivion, the power goes out and they leave her alone and strapped down while other mentally ill patients begin to run amok. A mysterious girl from Dorothy's hallucinations breaks her out and they run away to the closest river they can find and throw themselves in it. Well, it's a good thing I never had a drowning scare in a fast-moving river as a kid, because that would make this scene especially stressful on me. Dorothy awakens to the voice of a familiar friend.
What's that?
Oh, I was just trying to lay my egg, that's all.
Belina?
And I'm going to ignore the fact that she recognized the voice of a hen as though there was nothing weird about that.
Why'd you give me peanut butter to make it look like I'm talking?
So the animated faces in the rocks are a little intimidating, as long as they're not talking about poultry.
Chicken with her.
They find the remnants of the yellow brick road and skip the entirety of the first movie's endless miles to arrive at the Emerald City in mere minutes. The city has been devastated and all the people turned to stone, except for these goddamn creatures called the Wheelers. If you look at these guys from a kid's perspective, they seem kind of like a cross between sadistic clowns and robotic spiders. They're seriously creepy, when they're not talking about poultry.
The Gnome King doesn't allow chickens anywhere in Oz.
While eluding the Wheelers, we find a new friend in the form of the mechanical Royal Army of Oz named Tick-Tock. So you wind Tick-Tock up, and he kicks a lot of ass when bad guys fight as badly as bad guys usually fight in kids' movies. After the Wheelers are sent packing, we finally meet one of the two main villains in the story, Queen Mombi, porcupine goddess of Oz. You know, all jokes aside, I don't think that there are many weirder and freaky-deakier concepts for a villain in a family film than what you're about to see. That's right, she collects heads to wear according to her mood, and she begins to eye up little Firuza Bulk for her prospective cranial collection.
You will be rather attractive. One day.
Locked away in the tower, we find Jack Pumpkinhead, who helps Tick-Tock and Dorothy put together a flying hunting trophy to help them escape. Yeah, I know he's kinda lame looking, but you should have seen the first trophy they brought back to life. So there's this thing with them flying over a desert, some dumbasses die, and then they crash on a mountain. This is where we meet the baddest baddie of the film, the Gnome King. Spelled like the city, not the garden ornaments. And just to show how much of a meanie the Gnome King is, he makes the audience take acid and throws Dorothy down a psychedelic tunnel. At the bottom of the tunnel is the Scarecrow, who is in the movie for about a second before the Gnome King magically steals him away to become an ornament in his collection. Dorothy is faced with a challenge for her and her crew, to go into the Gnome King's ornament gallery and guess what ornament she's turned Scarecrow into. If one of them can guess correctly, they get the Scarecrow back. If not, they get turned into ornaments themselves. So one by one, the guys shuffle off to take their guesses. Well, it turns out that the Gnome King only wanted to get Dorothy alone so that he could reveal his deepest and darkest secrets to her.
That he's a cross-dresser!
Well, I'm sure it's just a magic-related thing, and he has no other flamboyant mannerisms.
They're very powerful.
Ah, well, he's not the first cross-dresser in history to give people an ultimatum in life.
You, cake or death? Death, please. No, cake, sorry, cake.
Dorothy uses her psychic powers to decide on her guess, which actually works, and the Scarecrow is brought back to life. Well, because the Gnome King is a righteous dude and an anthropomorphic rock man of his word, he accepts defeat gracefully and keeps up his end of the bargain. Yeah, he tries to fucking kill them. I've met more than a few people who remember this sequence and said it was one of the first times they remember seeing something in a movie as a child that truly frightened them. And I think it's really held up over time, with one small exception. It turns out that you can kill a rock god with an egg. Yes, eggs are poisonous to gnomes, apparently. With the Gnome King vanquished, Dorothy is able to retrieve the ruby slippers and wish everyone back to the Emerald City. Or at least about 2 miles outside the Emerald City. Everything is returned to its original splendor. They are all given a wonderful parade, and the movie suddenly ends. Okay, that's not really the ending. We still haven't gotten to see the Tin Man's one and only line. So Dorothy makes it back to Kansas, where she's found by her uncle. It turns out that the asylum burned to the ground after being struck by lightning, the doctor is dead, and we see the evil nurse being wheeled away by the police. Dorothy is returned home where her uncle is finishing the house, and all ends happily. Well, she's still having waking dreams while looking in mirrors, but now the hallucinations are intelligent enough to advise her to shut up about seeing them. So that's Return to Oz in a nutshell. It had a huge budget, but it failed miserably at the box office, only producing a half of what its cost was in revenue. Critics mostly hated it, most notably Siskel and Ebert. When the movie came to VHS, it started to catch on a little bit more, but to this day a lot of people tend to forget it even exists. I know I've taken my fair share of jabs at this movie, but there's really so much that could be said about it that's good. The imagery and photography is really nice, which gives it a very classic feel. The cast is pretty solid all around, especially for Bulk, who was only 9 years old at the time of filming. Just imagine absorbing this story as a small kid when you've mostly been fed silly cartoons and Sesame Street. It would be a real jolt to the system, and I think that's a good thing for a young brain. I turned out pretty normal. So give Return to Oz a try if you're curious about it after watching this review. You may find that it's kind of a cool fantasy movie to add to your collection. Well, I'm Topher, and this is Toto, from Movie Misperception saying, insert catchphrase here. Bye!